Containers tabs. With this component you can switch between content in the panel using different tabs. Here we see the basic example where we have a horizontal menu that features the tabs, and then we have the tab panel below it that changes all of the content when we click a new tab. Right now it's only the number changing, but in fact it is the whole content. But the content is just very similar in these examples. We can have vertical tabs if we prefer that, and we can use that to place them in a grid, vertical tabs in a grid like so. We can have collapsing tabs, so when we click the same tab it will collapse and remove all of the content below it. You can have a match height, so notice here that we have the same height of the content area, the tab panel, even though some of the tabs have less content. Some of the panels have less content. So this is a way to match the height. We can create a deep link functionality. So when we click a tab, we can see the deep link up here. And when we open up a new tab and enter this deep link, we can see that this tab has already been selected. We can combine this with something called deep link smudge. So if we copy this link and open yet another tab, then it will scroll down to the tab here and also have the right tab open. Finally, we can adjust the browser history. So now I'll tap through these tabs, and I can now use the arrow keys up here to go back and forth in history. So that's a nice feature that you can choose to use as well. Now let's get started. To create the tab component, we start with a UL element. Give it the ID, tabs, basics, and the class tabs, and finally the data tabs attribute. Now we'll add a list element with the class tabs title, and inside of this we'll add an anchor tag that will lead to the first content panel. So we'll use the ID tabs basics 1 and also use the area selected attribute, the value true, since we want this to be the currently active one. So we must also add the class is active to this one. Now let's copy to create the tab component. We start creating a UL element, and we give it the ID tabs basics and the class tabs and the data tabs attribute. Now we'll create the individual tabs. So we add a list element, give it the class tabs title. Then we'll add an anchor tag that leads to the ID of the tab panel that we'll create later. So we use the ID tabs basics 1 and give it the text value tab 1. Now we'll copy this a few times and update the numbers here to 2 and 3. And now we want the first one to be the active one. So we add the class is active, and for accessibility we also add the area selected attribute, the value true. Now we'll create the tab content. So we add the div tag with the class tabs content and the data tabs content attribute, with the value being the ID of our tabs up here. So these will be connected. Then inside of this we create the first content panel, give it the ID tabs basics 1 that we were referring to up here, and the class tabs panel. Now we'll add a heading element with the text tab panel number 1, and then paragraph with some random text here. And now we can copy all of this code here and paste it in a few times. Update this number to 2 and 3. And now, since the first one was the active one, we need to add the class is active to this one as well. Alright, let's save, go back into the browser and refresh. Here we see our tab panel working. Now let's see how we can make vertical tabs instead. We'll go back and we'll copy all of this code here. We'll paste it in. Now we need to add the class vertical to the parent element here, and that is simply it. But to avoid conflicts, we need to update all of our IDs. So I'll select all of these at the same time and we'll change it to tabs vertical. Let's save and see how this looks like. Now we see our vertical tabs. Let's see how we can use that to place it in a grid. So we'll go back here, and then we'll start creating our grid, a div tag with the class grid container. Inside of this, we add another div tag to create the row. So we add the classes gridX and gridMarginX. Then we'll add our column. So we add the div tag with the class cell and medium 3. So it will take up a quarter of the available width. And now inside of this, we can paste our tabs here, like so, the unordered list, and then we'll create the other column using the classes cell and medium 9, so it will take up 3/4 of the available width, and then we'll copy and paste the content, the tabs content. Finally, we'll need to update our IDs and more so it won't conflict. So we'll simply add the word grid so it becomes tabs vertical grid. Let's save this, go back and refresh and see what it looks like. Now we have the grid here. If we resize our browser window to the small size, we can see that initially it looks like vertical tabs because the grid is not turned into 2 columns yet. Then on medium devices it turns into a 2-column grid. Let's look at more options for the tabs. So we'll scroll back and copy this code here. Now we'll create the collapsing tabs where we can collapse the tab panel by clicking on the currently open tab. To do this, we must add the data active collapse attribute with the value being true. And as before, we'll update these values here. Tabs collapsing. We'll save, go back and refresh. Now we can see it works normally, and then we can also collapse the currently open tab. Let's look at match height functionality. We'll paste in the code, and then we'll change the amount of content in these tabs here. Now we'll update these values to tabs height, and we're not yet finished, but we'll just take a quick look in the browser. we can see that the height changes and the rest of the page layout is jumping. We can create a match height by adding the data match height attribute with the value true. Now when we go back and look, we can see we have to wait for the reload. Now we can see that the height is maintained, so the page won't jump. Now let's continue and take a look at deep link functionality. To create the deep link functionality, we'll copy the code from before, like so, paste it in. Then we'll remove this data match height attribute that we used in the previous example. Instead, we'll use the data deep link attribute with the value true. Now we'll update all of these IDs, select all of them, change it to tabs deep link. Now let's save, go back in the browser and refresh. Now notice in the address bar up here, when I click a tab, it will add the deep link to the URL. This also means that if we copy this code or this address, open a new tab and paste it in, the current tab will automatically be selected on page load if we use this deep link functionality from another page. We can also create a deep link smudge, which will do the same thing, plus it will scroll down with an animation to the current tab. So let's go back, copy the previous code here, paste it in. Now we'll keep the data deep link attribute and also add the data deep link smudge attribute with the value true. We'll now update all the values of our IDs here. So it will be called tabs deep link smudge. Let's save this, go back and refresh. We open up a tab panel here. We see that right now nothing looks changed, but if we copy a link here from the address bar and open up a new tab, paste it in, we can see that the browser scrolls down. Let's have another look. We can see that it scrolls down to the right tabs component. Alright, finally let's see how we can use the browser history feature. Now let's copy this code from before, paste it in here, remove this data attribute, and instead we'll add the data update history attribute with the value true. We'll keep the data deep link attribute. Now we'll copy or update these IDs here, so it will be tabs history. We'll save it, go back and refresh. Now we can see that when we tap through this tabs component, it has then been included to the browser history, which we can see when we navigate with the arrows up here. Notice that the address will change and the current tab will also change. So this is how you can include the tab navigation to the browser history. And that was all about the tabs component.